Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another series of Did You Know? Today, I think we have a great panel, but before we get started, I kick it over to Brian to get us going on the questions. Again, please send in your questions, whether it's related to this topic we're going to talk about today or any other topics, and turn on your notifications so you can stay in touch with us, not only for Did You Know, but any other events or articles that we send out or media releases. So with that, today we're going to talk about fentanyl. Brian, lead us in that discussion, please.
Sheriff Bill, and it's my privilege to be on this panel here. Chief Deputy Corey Solferino sitting next to me down on the end. Lieutenant Brandon Zirkle. Definitely the hot topic, Sheriff, right now is definitely fentanyl. You were on Fox 11 yesterday with Chris Murphy in the morning talking about it. People in the news want to talk about it. Just generically, how big of a problem is this right now?
This is a very big problem. And I think today we're going to talk about from two ends, how we're addressing on the supply side and how we're addressing on the demand side. A few years ago, we knew it was coming, but I don't think any of us realized how close home it would hit and how often it was going to hit our community. And it's an epidemic, like I said yesterday, that we've never experienced before.
It's something that parents need to be made aware of. We'll talk about that a little later, how you can talk with your kids about it. And Chief Deputy Solferino, you made a great point just a few moments ago, talking about how you called it a one and done, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's talk about the supply and demand idea of it. When you say supply side, explain that to somebody who may not know what you're talking about.
So when we talk about the supply side, it's those that are pushing the drugs onto our street, those that are bringing it into our communities and pushing it out to those that have addictions. And then on the demand side, it's those that have those addictions. How are we addressing and trying to reduce the demand, but also how are we trying to address and reduce the supply? I think that's the way we've seen over the years during Ronald Reagan's era, war on drugs, that was addressing the supply. Over the last couple of years, we've seen more focus on addressing the demand and those resources for those battling addiction. I think, again, we'll talk about today how we're doing that on both sides at the Sheriff's Office.
Now, Patrol has seen this basically almost all the time. It's almost right. You don't want to say anything regular. I've been educated that there's nothing routine about routine patrol. Patrol is not routine. And we had a very scary incident, Corey, a couple of weeks ago.
We did, Brian. In fact, you don't want to say routine in the patrol side of things because we don't want our officers to let their guard down. We always teach them to be vigilant. We teach them to be situationally aware. But one of the issues that we're experiencing with these overdoses is the regularity with which they're happening. It's not just once a month. It's not just every other. It's happening on a frequent basis to the point where just this last weekend, we had one death resulting in an overdose and 3 overdoses, luckily, which our officers were supplied with Narcan, naloxone, and were able to bring back 3 of those individuals from a drug overdose potential death situation.
Now, Zirk, we affectionately call him Zirk around it, Lieutenant Zirkle, who has incredible experience doing everything in this building. From your SOD side, Special Operations, how's it affected you?
Well, my job on the SOD side is to stop these drugs coming in to our community with the Regional Narcotic Unit and our Highway Interdiction Unit. Our seizures are significantly up. In 2022, we seized 94 pounds of fentanyl off the streets or in our community between those 2 units, up from 23.5 pounds of fentanyl in 2021. So that shows that our enforcement efforts are increasing, but it also shows that the amount of drugs coming into our community is increasing. And the Sheriff's Office as a whole, not only just the Sheriff's Office, but our first responders in Washoe County are utilizing quite a bit of our time responding to these overdose calls. In 2022, we responded, first responders, police, fire, and REMSA responded to 847 calls for service relating to drug type overdose calls for service. Out of that, our deaths are significantly increasing as well, those overdose deaths. We had 326 overdose drug-related deaths in 2022, up from 274 drug-related deaths in 2021. So a pretty big jump there, but more probably scarier is we jumped from 79 fentanyl-related deaths in 2021 to almost double of 145 fentanyl-related deaths in Washoe County last year alone.
Yeah, we did mention that there is a video. We're going to give you basically firsthand knowledge and witness to what this is. I will warn you, it is a bit dramatic. It has been redacted, so faces have been blurred out, but it is dramatic. So if you were sensitive to it, may not be something you'd want to watch, but why don't you take a look at this?
What did she take? Did she take fentanyl?
I don't know. She
Did she
took
take
a lot
heroin?
of something, and I don't know what it was.
Go grab Narcan. I've got one.
I don't know what it was. I'm going out there.
She took the same thing. That's
Jesus, please. Ryan!
Washoe 1 North
Ryan,
31.
no.
It's because we have an
Hey,
overdose.
she's out.
We have a
She's out
second
too.
person that just OD'd in the house.
Help her. Somebody
Hey,
please.
I need another police.
Come help her.
Go to the police.
He's on the way. He's on the way.
Calm down.
He's out.
Just tell me where it
Yeah,
is.
give it to them.
She's still breathing.
You okay?
Please step outside, ma'am.
I need to go, yeah.
Washoe 1 North 31. We have a third overdosing. No, they are not. Just Washoe County right now. She's got a slow pulse. She's the only one that hasn't been Narcan yet, and she was the last to pass out.
71, copy. Dispatch, you copy the request. Dispatch, copy. I'll go ahead and put in for another.
That's just flat out scary to watch, and we'll get into a little bit more of that in a minute. When it comes to the deputy keeping his cool, there, I want to talk on this. That performance of being able to just keep your cool in a situation like that, Sheriff, is astounding. It's amazing.
It is, and that's why I'm so proud of the men and women throughout our entire region. But at the sheriff's office, they're faced with this day in and day out, and it takes a toll. I mean, it takes a toll on the worry that we're dealing with a drug that's extremely powerful. We saw what happened in Douglas County a couple months ago when they were exposed and they had to administer Narcan to their own people. And our members are responding, and they are armed with Narcan. They're ready to help. And so I think it's something that this video was very dramatic, but it was something I think we needed to do to show both how our members are responding, how their training is kicking in, their compassion, but also we got to hit home of how do we have those conversations.
Now, Lieutenant, these were three very young women, and this is a pattern.
It is a pattern. I mean, we've had overdose deaths from very small children who have gotten into their parents' narcotics that are inside the home and not safely secured. But our major age group where we're seeing that uptick in fentanyl-related overdose calls is the age group of 25 through 34. Over the last 6 months of 2002, we had 57 overdose-related deaths in that 25 to 34 age group. We also, Washoe County Sheriff's Office alone responded to 40 calls for service for fentanyl-related overdose deaths between July and December of 2022. So it's taken a significant amount of time out of our patrol division responding to these calls. And it's not just a medical issue. Deputies are going to these calls too because we are the first responders out there. We are oftentimes the closest to these calls. And so our deputies are the first on scene many times to these medical events. The stats are hard to get because that call might be just a person down in a vehicle. It might be a domestic violence call that we respond to. And then we find out later after getting on those calls that there is some drug overdose related calls. So the numbers are hard to compile, but you can see that we've significantly increased our response to related deaths. And fentanyl overdose related calls for
Well,
service.
the most dapperly dressed gentleman at the table here, of course, is Chief Solferino, who's one of our representatives working hard down at our state legislature, our government liaison, Mary Sarah Kinner, who is brilliant at this, and Sergeant Jason Walker also down there. We'll get to some legislation in a second, but it's this stuff right here. The Narcan itself, can you go into maybe just how important this is, and how many lives it's saving?
It's life-changing, Brian. It truly is. The ability for us to attain our first group of naloxone and or Narcan through the Attorney General's office was huge, and training all of our personnel, both in detention and on patrol, to just have this equipment with them has saved, just as you could see from Lieutenant Zirkel's statistics, just countless lives.
Yeah. Let's talk about the legislature. What's going on down in Carson when it comes to fentanyl?
About the first 30 days almost completed, wrapped up down in Carson City. We have a lot of competing bills down there. Obviously, the sheriff talked about, the supply versus the demand side of it, and how do we legislate away drug trafficking. We understand that the war on drugs has been a losing battle for several years. So how do we traffic the traffickers, the high level ones, and how do we wrap around and put the support services around the users of the line level? We are working with the Attorney General's office. SB Senate Bill 35 with Attorney General Ford is currently in productions. We have stakeholder groups working with everybody from the ACLU and the District Attorney's office to the public defenders and our law enforcement legislative team to make sure that people understand that this is not a drug that you can play with.
Yeah.
We've gone through the navigation of the last several years from the medical legalization of marijuana to recreational legalization of marijuana. This is not marijuana.
Yeah.
This is, to your point we were talking about earlier today, a one and done. So when we're talking about people using recreational drugs or trying to figure out something, this is something they absolutely want to stay away from unequivocally.
Now, Sheriff, you've got a stacked team in Carson. I'm sure you're very, very confident there's going to be some good progress on this. But leading to his point of, this is a drug that is mixed in with a lot of other things, and it's literally blended in, and you don't know. It may be a pill. You think you're taking some type of pill, and it may have X amount versus Y amount in a different pill.
Absolutely. And that's where we hit home. And I want to hit home here with parents or individuals that have loved ones, family, friends. You have to have that conversation. We had a close friend who lost her son, thought it was Valium, right? So if you're out there and you're using, if you're taking anything, if you have young kids, high school kids, college kids, they're going to those parties. We're all at that age. They don't know where those Percocet, Vicodin, whatever is being passed around at that party or passed around to friends. If I didn't buy it at the store, what I'm telling parents and everybody out there is, do not take it.
Yeah.
Because the way I describe it is this, and I think I took it from Corey when he was down at the last session. When they mix fentanyl into whatever else, it's at a kitchen table. They use the basic blender that they get at, Rayleigh's, Walmart, Target.
Mm-hmm.
They blend it up and then they repress it.
Yeah.
So it's not like at one of our pharmaceuticals where it's exactly measured in micrograms or whatever grams of fentanyl. So one pill may have just whatever they're mixing it with, and no fentanyl, and the next one, the way they repressed it, it's got everything of fentanyl. And we hear these tragedy stories every single day, and they're becoming more and more often as the data is showing us, and we're seeing lives and families destroyed.
The three of you are not just three of the top cops in north of Beatty. I mean, you're dads more than anything. I've gotten to know you guys as men, as colleagues, as friends, and all three of your fathers. As a dad, if you can look out and talk to a parent, Corey, let's start with you. I'm not going to call you Chief Deputy. I'll call you Corey. What would you tell parents?
Certainly. Education, have those difficult conversations with your kids. Having two kids out of the house that are proudly serving or served in the U.S. military and now in their professional careers, and a daughter who's in middle school right now, is having those conversations about alcohol use, about drug use, getting them to be able to be comfortable with you so you know where they're at, that you are involved in their lives, that you do have your own wraparound services around your kids so you know what they're doing when they're not in school or they're not participating in sports. If you can control that narrative, you can prevent tragedies from happening.
Zerk, as a dad, your thoughts?
Again, as a father of a daughter who just graduated from college and a son who's in high school, those educational environments also lead to parties and places where these kids can come into contact with either the parents of the children who's having the party or drugs that are being brought into these parties from other people. And you just really never know what it is that you're taking. We found fentanyl and cocaine. The majority of the heroin that we're seizing off the street contains fentanyl inside of it as well. And as the sheriff pointed out, that pill might have a lethal dose in it, or it might have nothing in it. There's just really no way to tell what you're taking. So have that conversation with your children, explain to them that none of this stuff is like what we dealt with when we were children. You just really never know what that pill is, what the powder is, or what the substance is that you're being involved with. So I would say not only have those conversations with your children, but control the activities they're involved in. The more legitimate activities you get them involved in, such as sports or academics or speech and debate or other things that occupy their time, the less likely they are to run into the free moments of time where they are out there experimenting with drugs.
And Sheriff, I will call you Sheriff because his name's on the building. He's earned it. I know that your kids and your family are your world. You as a dad, it has to concern you.
Absolutely. Father and 4 kids and our second grandbaby any day here. I have those fears. I have a child in high school, 2 in college, 1 that's out serving in our military. But besides having that conversation, for parents out there, educate yourself. There are resources out there. We have them on our webpage. You need to do as much education, because if you think that your kids, no matter what age, and unfortunately with technology now, they are becoming more and more educated at a much lower age. So educate yourself on those dangers. If you don't know where to go, come to our doors. Reach out to us. There's so many out there, so that when you're talking to your kids, our kids joke with us, we're helicopter parents. Mm-hmm. But you have to be, and Corey hit on it, you have to know, and so did Zerk, get them into those activities, but be a part of their lives and be nosy. Know what they're doing online. Again, we're seeing that on the interdiction side of how they're dealing these drugs. It's not sitting at a corner anymore. It's on Snapchat and all these other social media platforms. So as a parent, educate yourself. So as you're talking to your kids, you can bring that home, because you don't want to be that parent that we come to the door and have to give you that horrible news.
Right.
You don't want that. And so it's harder to have that conversation than it is to sit your kids down, or your family member, or a friend who has an addiction, and tell them, I'm here for you, and I'm going to wrap my arms around you and be there.
And there was one thing we wanted to touch base on. I think that is a good education about telling kids, is that if you're at a party and something happens, if there is somebody that you believe is overdosing, call law enforcement, because you're not going to get in trouble for being a good Samaritan. A lot of people maybe won't make a phone call because they think they're going to get in trouble. We'd rather save a life, correct?
Absolutely. And Corey was in that, if you want to touch on that.
Absolutely. When we were looking at, responsibility, civil litigation and criminal litigation for people that were maybe perhaps not trained in deploying Narcan, naloxone, or were worried about civil ramifications, the law is very blatant in Good Samaritan. So for 453 in Nevada Revised Statute 453 C.100 is the civil Good Samaritan relief, if you will, for people who are acting in good faith and making sure that they're making that call to save a life. And then 0.150, same law, is the criminal remedy, where if you do have paraphernalia, or you do have possession of a small amount of substance, or maybe you are with the victim or the opposing party of a TPO and call and they overdose, that those legal ramifications will not come to fruition, that we will absolve you of those. It's the Good Samaritan immunity clause. So you're not prevented from making the call that needs to happen, Sheriff.
Absolutely. And with that, we've kind of focused on supply, but I know Corey and I on the demand side, one thing I want to hit on, because I think that's valuable, because, right, we just talked about the supply and how we're going to target those traffickers, and how Zergel's team is hammering it. On the demand side, what we've done so far in the first 5 years, right? We've had our opioid treatment certification in the detention facility, one of a few in the nation. Our medication assisted treatment program, again, one of the nation, or one of the few in the nation. And we have now the first in the state. It's a female inmate who's voluntarily stayed here. She's in our MAP program. She's getting ready to transfer to NDOC at the state prison, and we are going to transfer on that MAP program. So again, we hammered the supply side, but here's what we're doing on the demand side. And within the facility, we know, unfortunately, those battling addictions, they're going to have their setbacks, usually about 12. And so they unfortunately may end up in the facility, and we recognize that. So with our detention services unit, we wrapped out, we got those certifications, and we're working to link them to services while they're incarcerated. But more important, that they're going back into our community. We're trying to link them with resources so when they get out, we provided those tools and that pathway. So hopefully that's our last relapse. And then I know Captain Solferino, or sorry, Chief Deputy Solferino
Still
is
no, sir.
working on. And if you want to hit on what we're looking at this next year in patrol.
One of the things that we'd like to do with integrating our mobile outreach safety team and just the wonderful help that they've done is also working with our homeless outreach and sending them down to Las Vegas with their Lima program and how we're transitioning that. What does that mean for the residents of Washoe County? A diversion program. We know that we're not going after the low level users. We're trying to fight this from a standpoint of a social issue, not a criminal issue. So we want to be able to make sure that we give them the wraparound services that they need and use that diversion program. So we're not just arresting on the low level possession charge and bringing them in and clogging an already overcrowded jail, Sheriff, that we're getting them the services that they need on the outside and getting them into the programs and that treatment and that follow up, because we do know that they are going to have several setbacks before they have the successes that they need.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. I'm
too,
excited
sir.
about that.
A comment there. I just want to bring up a comment. Eva Halliford, who's watching this right now. I'm afraid for our children and grandchildren. Well, Eva, this is proactive policing right here. This is not reactive, it's proactive. And you can see these gentlemen here are thinking ahead and trying to work as hard as they can to break the circle that unfortunately so many people in our community have been sucked into.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you, Brian, for helping us through this conversation. And Chief Deputy Solferino, Lieutenant, soon to be Captain Zirkle. Thank you guys. For everybody out there, thank you for the comments. Thank you for joining us. Again, please send in your questions. Hopefully, both what we presented today will foster some questions or some curiosity for parents or anybody else out there. Please ask them. We're ready. We're willing. We're able to answer those. Please turn on your notifications. And most importantly, please help us fight this epidemic. So again, thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to next month for another Did You Know?